warm welcome to this enterprise architecture webinar, which will Marius Snell from Notion will introduce to us in a short while, as well as our guest speaker, Craig Martin. But in the meantime, what I'd like to do while people are joining, we have launched an Ethics in ICT video recently, we being the Institute of IT Professionals South Africa. Some of you may have seen it before. It's cool. We can watch it again. It's only 3 minutes. So while others are joining, I'd like you to sit back and relax, and let's take a watch at this video. Thanks.
As professionals in the world of information technology, we use our creativity, skills, and understanding of the world around us to make change. Each piece of code, technology, or information that we send out into the world takes on a life that has the potential to change the world around it. In our fast-paced world of AI, robotics, media, and communications, the actions we take dictate the future of these technologies. These technologies significantly impact people and the environment around us. As we grow, understand, and adopt AI both in our work and personal lives, we will be presented with moral and pragmatic decisions that can be used either in the upliftment or to the detriment of those around us. In everything we do, it is important to visualize, study, and calculate the impact that our creations will have. The fundamental way to achieve this is by imagining the impact your actions could have on you, your family, community, and society. Personal information can be readily stolen through phishing, viruses, and malware, leading to psychological, social, and financial harm to individuals. This abuse of personal information poses a threat not only to the affected individuals, but also to organizations at large. Imagine if this happened to you or your loved ones. We often underestimate the significance of our work, yet it's crucial to recognize that we are at the forefront of innovation. We play a pivotal role in propelling our world forward and shaping the future. We have the ability to mold our future into one that is filled with darkness, destruction, inequality, and unsustainability. It doesn't have to be this way, though. By using our skills, tools, and insights into the impacts our actions have on the world around us, we can build the future into something beautiful and exciting. A future that does not only benefit us, but benefits society and the generations that will come after us. We, as information technology
I hope you got that all right. It looks a bit odd on my side. Maurice, are you there? I'm seeing Craig, but not Maurice. There we go.
I am here. And you can hear me?
Were you able to see the video okay? Did it sound all right?
Yeah, every now and then it hang and the last sort of got cut off. So that's the bits I got from it.
Okay, apologies for that. Anyway, so Maurice, thank you for joining us, and Craig as well. And I'd like to hand over you to take us forward. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Tony. I really do appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. As Tony has introduced me, I'm Marius Snell, and I'm the lead for the IITPSA Enterprise Architecture Special Interest Group. We are keen to get ideas for topics you would like us to cover. We currently have about 3 more ideas for the year, but we also welcome new ideas. So please keep a lookout for the new sessions that are going to come up for the rest of the year. And please feel free to share ideas with us because it's always something we want to make sure that this community is of interest to all of you within the IITPSA. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker, Craig Martin. Craig is the founder and the CEO of DesignChain, a leading innovation and business design and consultancy with a global presence spanning the UK, Africa, and Australia. With over 20 years of experience in consulting, business innovation, and strategy development, Craig has been at the forefront of transforming organizations by blending strategic design and business architecture. In addition to his work at DesignChain, Craig also serves as a non-executive director at Notion Consulting. That's our company, an African-based strategy and architecture services firm. His experience in navigating complex business challenges and driving sustainable growth has made him a sought-after advisor and thought leader in his field. Today, Craig will share his insight on strategic experimentation through dynamic business architecture. Drawing from his extensive experience and innovative approach to business transformation, please join me in welcoming Craig Martin. Thanks, Craig. I'm going to hand over to you now.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? And
yes, I
can. There we go. All right. Thank you, Boris. Thank you, Tony. And good morning, everyone. I'm dialing in from a typically overcast London, but it's definitely warmer here than what you're having down south at the moment. So, as Marius introduced, let me just get this up and running so I know where I am. I wanted to have a conversation today about strategic experimentation and the use of this concept called digital twins. I spent a lot of time designing and configuring organizations to really look at, well, what's the most effective mix of resources in a business at a strategic level and down at an operating level. And ultimately, that's effectively what makes successful business. What's the recipe that you put in? How much salt do you add and spice do you add so that you can create the perfect meal? And so it's a constant journey of improving and testing new flavors and new mechanisms to optimize. But it can be quite expensive at the business level. And so what I want to share with you today is some of the techniques that we've refined to help us begin to experiment for a lower cost base before we make some of those investment decisions. This journey started some years ago where we got tired of designing businesses in Excel spreadsheets and static tools. And so we built a non-deterministic multi-agent environment that allowed us to effectively mimic the behavior of an organization as it moved and morphed and changed shape. This is a screenshot actually of the original version. So the code is a little old. And I thought, let me find something that actually gives you a little more immersive experience around what we'd actually created. And they're using the same engine behind this code from at IDA's demonstrating. But it's a very similar sort of look and feel as we sort of created this, artistic masterpiece at the time. I won't go into details of sharing some of the challenges, but what we were trying to do was try and get a view of the organism of an organization so we could actually start to make some decisions. And then, fast forward to the arrival of what's referred to as the decentralized autonomous organization. And this, I was super excited about this. It hasn't really gained much momentum, but effectively it's building a standalone organization on top of the Ethereum platform, which is effectively the blockchain, and a self-governing autonomous organization that really had a bunch of rules that took in inputs, processed those rules, and allocated funds via tokens and voting to conduct certain work. And so there were no staff, there was no HR, there was no politics or people. The organization effectively just operated on a series of rules. So I think there's a future there, but still lots to grow in that space and a maturity, I think. But when it arrived, it was certainly an exciting time for us because we started a blockchain company to take advantage of it. But I think there's probably another decade or so before these DAOs start to create automated organizations to drive in the zero margin cost society. And so what does that leave us now? So let's just take a little bit of a step back and well, why do we want to do these things? Why are we, trying to create a digital version of organizations so we can make decisions? And this triple loop learning model is something that I've spoken about quite often. And let me talk you through it quick. Maurice, just ping me on the WhatsApp just so I know how much time I've got. Sorry. And so what we've actually got is there's this view, if we read this from left to right, and what you have is why we describe value, what is value, how is value created and captured, all right, and how is value delivered, and how is it measured. And so there's this process of how we move this values conversation across down into execution in the business. And then there's results that we get from this business, and we pull that back via very expensive data projects to try and get understanding. So, are we doing things right? Are we doing the right things? And why are these the right things? And this is how the loop works. So there's this reinforcement, there's this feedback mechanism that occurs in business. And a lot of the time we spend a lot of money, and a lot of the big data and machine learning things tend to focus a lot on this bottom piece, which is effectively the feedback mechanism. And what we want to deal with today is the feed forward mechanism. So can we actually create more experimentation and learn faster up at this level? We know how to do that with design sessions and prototyping and all this to it. There's aspects of DevOps and that also might sit here. But how do we actually make a decision, test it and play it back, make it, test it and play it back? And so that's what comes from this. The digital twin is you're effectively trying to close these loops, and there's different ways to do it. On the left, the typical architectural model, you might have an organization in which you're representing it in some sort of digital form, but they're separate. All right, I mean, it's a model in Visio or something like that, and you're trying to get as close to reality. Then you have a digital shadow, which effectively takes that physical object and has a connection to its digital version, and then you have a digital twin, which effectively is both. So we can make changes on the twin, and it effectively cascades those changes into business. Some years ago, we did this via integration platforms and all the rest of it. So as models changed between a process between two systems, it generated the transformation code, loaded that into the integration platform, and automatically updated all the way through. So it's not new to be able to do these types of things, but we lack the ability to do it at a strategic level. And so let's take a step back a little. When we try and do problem solving, we've actually, we start on the left and we move across to the right in the solution space. And as we progress on this journey, our knowledge about the problem space is increasing. And the complexity is being reduced and our certainty is increasing. And so this is the consulting process, this is the problem-solving process, and eventually we get to this point, all right, where there's a decision point. And the sooner you can make that decision, the better. And then sometimes that decision is made, and then to the right of that line, you spend a lot of time using analysis to prove why you originally made that decision. And so those individuals who have got really good management heuristics, in other words, rules of thumb, can look at a problem space and make this decision earlier, applying those heuristics. And you've got disciplines like design thinking and those types of things that sit at the top that would allow you to unpack those heuristics to get those decisions quicker. But ultimately, if one wants to create a digital twin, there's two types of twins that you can create. There's the twin on the left, which is an unknown. So how do we create a model of an organization, but it's still unknown. We don't really know what the heuristics are, and we need to experiment with it. Versus a model on the right, which is a little more about the known physical space that I can interact with. And so this has been exacerbated with AI arriving in that, there's a lot of the complicated and simple attributes. So this is a sort of solution problem spectrum from David Snowden's Leaders Framework, working through this concept of complexity to complicated to simple. The future for us as humans effectively lies in us partnering with AI to solve complex problems. And by complex, I mean, these are these things that are constantly in a state of flux, whether it's homelessness or climate change and those types of things. To connect root cause is sometimes quite difficult. And so we need tools to start to help us in that complex space. But traditional digital twins tend to be more down on the left there in the complicated and simple. And there's a lot of knowns in there and the rules associated to those knowns. And there's a lot of disciplines that move us across these quadrants. This is the value versus complexity quadrant that I speak about quite often. And ultimately, most complex things are in the top right quadrant. And so that's where we would apply human capacity, and we'd apply innovation techniques to solve things that are complex and high value. But the intention is to reduce their complexity, so to push it down into maybe the bottom right quadrant. So can we take this, understand its heuristics, and then identify processes that can start to get some repeatability out of it? And then we move into the bottom right quadrant, where we can now start to get process improvement techniques. It's now no longer purely reliant upon human intervention, but there's some process intervention as well. And ultimately, we would want to automate that, and we can automate that in that bottom left quadrant. There's off-the-shelf software that we can get, all that sort of stuff. And top left quadrant, you'll outsource it, something like legal advice. It's not high value for your organization, but it's sort of complex discipline. And so there's multiple different disciplines that sort of move within those space. And the challenge is that the system that we're working in is very fluid, it's dynamic, but the models that we use to create them are very static. And so we probably need to change our game a little, because keeping and maintaining some of these models is a complex task. And so we often struggle with the governance of these and maintaining the flux. There's definitely room for this, make no mistake, because as you move further down that cycle, those processes and how you mix those resources in a business, they're known, and they're known building blocks in your organization. So you need to model them in that way. What about the complex space that sits above this, all those unknowns? How do we deal with that area? And in the digital twin world, when we start to unpack the digital twins, it's more towards the right. That a lot of, when we talk about digital twins, it's this built environment, that we can engage with and work with, and there's physical, tangible pieces. But there's a number of complex issues that sit on the left there, which is around economic, social, and natural environments. And at the moment, we're working on a project that's looking to redefine the economic ecosystem on how it does the food supply chain. All right, there's lots of complexity in that area, and it's you can't necessarily model that in what we would consider to be a traditional digital twin. And that community is definitely expanding. This is a statement from the Gemini papers, which is the sort of digital twin sort of think tank that I'm involved with here locally. And you'll see here, we must adopt systems-based thinking to address systemic vulnerabilities. Okay, so there's a need for us to look at how the system actually works and how we can mimic that behavior. All right, so what does that mean? Can we use different tools? So we've got to move. We want to move to the left here, because a lot of what we do as a consulting firm is we tend to operate on the left side more than the right, which is we're trying to solve a complex problem, and we're trying to understand where are the heuristics and where are the levers in this complex problem space. And so we're effectively needing tools in that space to help us with that journey. And so that's what I want to chat to you a little bit about today. And I'm going to give you a bit of a demonstration. And so we use system dynamics models because they are models that deal with a system and deal with complexity. For those of you that haven't dealt with these models before, I might just give a quick rundown. I'm just conscious of time. I think Murray said, I only had 30 minutes. So I'm going to whiz through some of these demonstrations quite quickly. All right. And so
I had it wrong. You've still got another about 40 minutes to go. I thought it was up to 1:45, but you can talk until 9 o'clock. So you've still got 40 minutes. So please enjoy yourself.
Oh, great. I can slow down now. Thanks, Maurice. Okay. All right. That's good. So what I want to take you through now is effectively we use a tool called Stella, but we also use tools called AnyLogic and a few others to model this space. Now let's see if I can get this working. Okay, hopefully, I'm just going to have to remember to zoom in because I see the resolution on your shared screen is a little different from mine. Okay. Now, when we model systems, we work with a few very basic concepts. And as I take you through the story, you're going to see how I've done it specifically for a business issue. So I'm not going to take you through climate change and policy stuff. I think it's kind of separate to what the focus is of your community. But I'm going to talk you through, slowly build you up around creating a dynamic business system and how we can interact with that. So this is a demonstration version, but I will show you some very, very complex completed models so you can actually see, okay, well, that's how big you can go. Okay. And so what we have is we've got a stock, all right, which is, that's in this case customers, all right. Let me just zoom right in. Okay. And that stock has flows, and there are customers that come in to this flow. So maybe through sales, I might have customers coming into that flow, and that maybe I get one customer coming in. What have I set this to? This is per month. So maybe I get 10 customers coming in a month. All right, and so then I've got a customer churn. All right, and so I've created a little bit of an algorithm here which says I've got a churn rate of 20%. All right, so I'm losing 20% of my customers a month. Simple little calculation you can do in Excel. I've also said, well, what do I want my target to look like? And so I've created a graphical graph on the side here which says, well, I'd actually like over time, I'd like my customers to grow and increase. And so let's maybe bring a graph in here so that looks a little easier. And I'm just going to drag this in there and this in there. All right, and so now I've got a bit of a view which says, all right, I've got a target customers, which is a reference model, and I've then got my current customers. And so clearly you can see I'm a little off the mark, and so I need to be able to play with this model. How can I grow my customers, because it's not getting up to the target level? And so now I can play with this very, very simple model. Can I increase my sales? So if I sort of top that sales up, I can start to get an understanding of the increase of sales. I can reduce my churn and bring my churn down. So I can actually, now you can start to see, you can see the rate of my customers rising on the side there. Let's increase this to 100, and maybe we'll get close to our approach. All right, and so now we run it again, and same story. We can now start to see, depending upon how I increase my sales, I can increase my customers and getting me close to the target that I'd work with. Very, very basic concept, right? So, well, how do I increase my sales? What's the next process up? So now we can start to work back. And as all demos go, I've got a pre-canned version here that I'll just drag in. All right. And so now we can start to build what some of you might know as a value stream. All right. And so we can start to bring in a whole process that starts to talk about the behavior of the business. And so it's important to understand that what I'm trying to mimic here, all right, is actually behavior. All right. And so let me just, working with a zoomed in version, just tend to slow things down a little. And so now what I want to do is I effectively want to build that entire value stream, and I'm going to connect this to total addressable market, to leads, and to prospect base. All right, there we go. And now I have an entirely different model. All right, let's just work through it quick. And so I now have a prospect base, and through customer acquisition, I add to my customers. I've got leads that lead to my prospect base. And so I'm going through a process here of prospecting, qualifying, customer acquisition, and customer churn. And so now what I've done is I've sort of mimicked the value stream, call it a process, whatever makes you happy. Okay. And I can start to experiment a little with this. And so if you look here, I've got customer acquisition rate. So I'm saying there's a 20% rate. So I'm saying I managed to convert 20% of the prospects, all right? And so that becomes an outflow of the prospects. They leave the prospect container and they move across to the customer container on the side. And so now I can start to mimic all of this behavior. And you can start to see there's different levers that I can play with. No longer have I just got one or two, okay? Well, really exceeding my target here. But you can now see I can begin to play with this in different ways. And depending upon how I change the lead conversion, that's going to affect some outcomes that I can work with. And so this now becomes a model that I can begin to experiment with. And I can start to build on. And that's often what we do is we start very small, we build, we understand more about the business, we understand about behavior, and we're basically closing that feedback loop that we're talking about. We'll talk about pulling data in and writing out just now. All right, and so what about next level? Okay, so let's go to the next model, which I've created a sort of a different version here. All right, and so one of the things that we can do is we can actually do what is called an optimization run. And so I can come in here and I can say, well, instead of me figuring out what's the best way to tweak these variables. So these are basically the levers in your system. And you're all probably familiar with the term lever. In a system, we're always looking for a lever. So I can do a small pull here and I create this massive cascading effect through the system. So that's what I mean by levers. And so, I've got a few levers to play with here. Well, what's the right balance? And so remember, it's all about mixing your business. What's the mix of resources? And so what's the mix of a conversion rate versus a lead conversion rate versus a customer acquisition rate that's actually going to give me the maximum number of customers? And so I can spend a long time tweaking these variables, trying to find out what's the right balance to create, or I can just use some Monte Carlo simulation or an algorithm. So what we've got set up here, all right, there's a bit of an algorithm here. You probably can't see it, and I can't zoom into it on this screen for whatever, but I'll just talk you through it. All right, and so there's basically a payoff that I want on my customers' stock. And I've said I've got a bunch of variables here that you can adjust them between these ratios, and I want to maximize the payoff. And so now what this means, I can just run an optimization run. And what it does is it effectively goes through a number of different scenarios, all right, that allow me to figure out what's the best configuration of customer. So perhaps a way to show that working is we can go in here, and I'm just going to drop this in there. And do this. All right, so now I can get a comparative run going here, and I can effectively, all right, start to compare. All right, let's adjust some things here. So every time I make an adjustment, it gives me a different run, and I can start to compare results, tweak these figures a little more, and start to compare results. And so you can see now a little slightly more engagement. I'm using some algorithms to start to optimize my business model, basically. And so I'm creating a shadow of the behavior of the business. So it's slightly different than a normal model technique. This is actually the behavior, how these parts work together as a system. So now try and imagine a lot of organizations, they've probably got about 20 value streams, core value streams, maybe a little less. And so what happens when all those value streams work together at the same time? And there's sort of this massive cascading effect that can occur. And so you can imagine it, as you start to build this up, you start to see the behavior of the system of an entire business. And so, a lot of you might deal with things like capabilities. And so what happens if we go and add capabilities in here? All right. And so, I've just dropped this sort of pre-canned components in here. And now those conversion rates, I've maybe got business capabilities that I can work with. Or maybe these could be systems. There's a bit of technology. We could say, well, what's the impact that the system might have? And we talk about capabilities because that's a general strategic term. But the source of a capability can be a person's cleverness, smarts, can be a process, can be a piece of technology. And so there's a maturity score that I can now begin to add in here. And so depending upon the maturity, I can now impact the conversion rate. And so now the pieces that I play with aren't the conversion rates. The piece I play with is the maturity rate. And so as I adjust the maturity, it's going to impact the outcome. And I can start to then build in logic associated to that maturity. And so in this case, I might say, well, what have I got here? $1 invested, all right, for level of marketing maturity. And so what this has done is allowed me to build a little bit of a graph which says, all right, for every dollar invested, here's the impact on the maturity of my marketing capability. So each iteration, I'm getting a little bit more refined and understanding the behavior of the model. And now I can start to have a conversation, which is like, all right, well, for each dollar invested, what's the dollar ratio that I need to invest, what I've got available for marketing versus what can I invest? So I might have a limited budget of 200 across, and I need to split that 200 across investing in all of these different capabilities. So I've got to find the right mix over here. And so what I'm working through is we're actually going through the cycle, slowly building up more. Now we're connecting new concepts and capabilities, and we're beginning to create a model that we can experiment with. All right? Because ultimately, I want to get to the point where I want to start to make strategic options, define strategic options, and make decisions based upon those options. So that I can, before I invest squazillions into a strategic initiative, can I play with it first and experiment with it? And you can understand how that can work at a policy level. And I mean, this model can grow and grow and grow. And now we've got multiple value streams that we can work with. Here's the top one that we were building on, and now we've connected a number of projects. But this one has got, the recruitment sector sort of plugged into it now, and it's looking at the costs of bringing on staff and when we need staff during a project life cycle, all of that, and in ensuring we don't have high churn rates of staff, how many are assigned to a project, how many are unassigned, all of those pieces are what we can play with, even the cost per sector. And so now this, we start to have a lot more detailed conversation with this model, because now I'm looking at my balance sheet, I'm looking at my income statement, and I've got opportunities now to try and optimize the profit in this one. So what's the right configuration that I need to have around time to qualify, time to close, starting projects? How much money must I keep in the bank account for working capital before I recruit the next one? And so there's a bunch of different levers that I can now begin to work with. And I've got optimization runs that look for the most effective configuration that's going to give you the highest profitability. And slowly but surely, more and more complexity coming in and allowing me to now begin to interact with this model. And you can see everything. I've got green items here, which I like. These are my levers. Excuse me. And so I've got a dashboard of levers that I can now begin to work with to start to have an impact in this environment. So this is actually still a fairly simple model, all right? We can actually create modules to work with. And so here, for example, is an option related to strategic options. And so, let's take this very, very simple one, in which it's talking about, well, how do we sustainably win with small business customers, profitably meeting their unique needs while helping to grow our overall banking business? So it's a question, it's a strategic question. How do I help them experiment with each of these areas? Well, I've got a couple of strategic options here. I can do nothing. Option one is I can pour money into marketing and money. Option two, I can create in-person small business hubs. And option three, I can just go purely digital. And so a starting point for a strategy is to basically experiment in each of those options. So you build a structure, for the do nothing model, and for the purpose of this demonstration, it's really super small. All right. And so, there's retail clients, there's small to medium clients, and we want to measure profitability. And so if we do nothing, here's a running model that allows us to look at what that profit might be. But we can also do the same for other options. So what happens if we start to invest marketing money in it? All right. And so now we're doing cost of acquisition, and we started to build a couple of marketing efforts into this conversation. Next option, what happens if we build in-person hubs? Well, what does that look like? All right. And so now there's a slight more complexity. And we're looking at new business hubs. We're looking at time to construct those hubs and how long it takes to migrate those clients across. And this gives us a breakdown of the third option. And what's the thought? Finally, maybe we just want to go purely digital, and we've got a version here, all right, which talks around the time to construct the tech platform, how long it's active for, how we acquire those customers, how long it's going to take to get them in to switch over to pure digital. And this becomes our fourth model to play with. And this one's specifically only looking at accumulated profit, but obviously there's a bunch of other metrics that we can do. So now when I run this combined model, I can sort of get a perspective across all of those options. And I can see, it looks like option 3 appears to be the better option at some very basic metrics, but you get the idea. All right. So now that decision line that we spoke about in that problem to solution conversation, we're operating on the left of that decision line. In that we're actually creating what we call digital twin, all right, of a complex space, all right, because it's always shifting and moving and it's in a state of flux. And so it isn't a digital twin of a phone and I can interact with it, or a room that's physical, or a factory. It's a digital twin of abstract concepts. And so that's what we're doing. But it's the behavior of those concepts that's important to us, and how the system behaves together. And you can so that's very light touch demonstration of sort of hands-on feel. So when we're talking about strategic experimentation, this is what we mean. We're taking the options, taking the strategies, but we're constructing the behavior of the business underneath it, and we're playing with it, we're testing it, and it's the behavior that we're actually trying to mimic most of all. These things get really nice when you start to do sort of climate policies and things, because I think you're working with much more complex systems at that state. So I'll just finish off with a few more slides. All right. And I think you said I had 40 minutes. My time's good. And so what does that mean? So there's a couple of interesting things that I want you to take away from this, is that these models, they're not easy to construct, and they rely on human capacity to understand the behavior and what we're actually seeing. We also input data. So what we do is we might take the results that you had last year, and we will create that as a reference mode. And so we'll design the system to achieve the same results that you had last year. So it's almost like back testing. And so we can actually see, okay, we've constructed the system so that it's mimicking the right behavior to get you to the results that you had last year. Right, now that we've back tested that, let's now make some changes. And so it's a good way to sort of validate your data, is to do that. But also remember what's happening is there's no big data. So in this world, you're playing with structures that haven't been invented yet. So there is no data in this space. You can't use machine learning algorithm to figure it out for you. And so you're constructing future state scenarios, all right, that have yet to produce that data. But what these tools allow you to do is actually construct that future state scenario and produce what is called synthetic data. So in other words, it's try and imagine I want to re-engineer the financial economic system. The economy is, there's a lot of those principles are old, and that we've got to sort of reinvent how economics works. Well, what does it look like? And can we create it? So there's no data for what that future might look like. So you're playing with something and you're creating this, let's call it a pure state model, and you can get it to generate synthetic data, all right? And so system dynamics, they create data. So we create data from structure, whereas AI and machine learning, they create structure from data. So it's slightly different. And so you bring these two worlds together. So here you've got all of this treasure trove of actual data, but you can also model a future state and create synthetic data. And then you can use that synthetic data to train your own algorithm for a future state that you want to inhibit. And so that algorithm can work you towards that future state. All right. Or you can bring these two worlds together and you can look at how are there any gaps that we can fill in our current business by bringing together all this dirty data from the environment and a cleaner version of synthetic data. Still a growing space, but if you look at the some of the Gartner, or not Gartner, but some of the predictions on synthetic data and its growth rate over the coming years is huge, because we're eventually going to start running out of data that we can use, and we're going to start to have to use some of our brains to think about future states construct them in a way so that machine learning algorithms can take those perfect models and then learn from them and become better. All right. And so there's lots of value within that space. And so one of the things that I'll just finish on this slide and then I'm done. One of the things that we tend to focus, this is our method for design. And so what we do is we include these models at different points. And so there's one up top here where we help clients experiment with this different business models. So there's 55 known business model stereotypes, we call them. And so they're all different ways to configure your business. And what we've done is we've captured each of those as a system dynamics template, basically. And so whether it's a multi-sided marketplace, or a subscription model, any of those known 55 business models, you can reuse those as templates. And so when you experiment with business model changes, we can now bring in some of those models and see, well, what's the impact on the behavior of my business if we apply this business model versus this one? We mix these two business models together. So it creates a nice conversation at the top here at a strategy level. And so it helps you figure out the way to play and how to win questions, which are very standard sort of strategic questions that get asked. But also right down the bottom here is want to understand the ecosystem and the impact of that ecosystem. We can also map the different players and the behavior and the impact of those players using causal loop diagrams and eventually impact on us. And that sort of helps us understand, well, what are the key processes that I might want to impact as the lever that I want to pull. So if we've identified that marketing is where the lever might sit, or churn reduction, whatever the case might be, then that's the process I want to focus on, or the value stream I want to focus on. And so what it starts to identify is connect me to my operating model where I should focus my attention. And I can go and pull those levers because I've mimicked the behavior on my side. 9 times out of 10, the people that understand the business best have mimicked the behavior into the tool, and therefore when you do pull the lever, it actually does have the corresponding result that occurs in the business. All right, that's my song and dance. You can get me, hold of me there through Morris. This handy little tool on LinkedIn. If you scan, you can link up to me on the LinkedIn community. But back over to you, Morris or Tony. Thank you everyone for listening. Hopefully it wasn't too overwhelming, and you got a bit of a flavor of what we're talking about in strategic experimentation. Thanks, Morris.
Thanks very much, Craig. That was really very insightful, and thank you very much for taking the time to share this with all of us in the community. Now, are there any questions for Craig? I see there was a few people asking about the tool that used in there is the Stella modeling software. Stella AI, if I'm correct, Craig, that's available. And then are there any other questions? Tony, I couldn't see if there were any specific questions. I quickly had a scan.
They are on the Q&A tab, Marius.
For some reason I can't see that, but maybe Tony, if you...
Yeah, sure. Excuse me, sorry, my voice is terrible, so I'll do my best. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Craig, there's a question.
I found it.
Okay, you go.
I apologize, I found it. Maybe I must just sometime read the screen there. So Sema Kaleng, hi, good morning, Sema Kaleng, had a question where he asked, do all organizations necessarily need to have a digital twin? Under which circumstances should an organization create a digital twin? Well, coming from the Stats SA, I think that's a very good question to ask, Craig.
Yeah, and it's actually a common question. I don't think they all do, but I think there is a future where it is going to be required. I just think that in order for you to compete, you're going to need to be able to have a place to experiment. Now, in a lot of situations, if I were to go and look at somebody's risk register, that normally tells me where I can focus one of these efforts, because they're high risk areas and there's some unknowns. We're not sure what's going to happen. We're not sure if this mitigation is going to work, any of those types of things. And so often a good place to look is, can we experiment with some of these risks and actually see how they play out in the business, or how some of our responses to those might work. So there's a few sort of signal areas. The beauty is that we know that strategy is a very abstract thing, and so a lot of people, they can't quite imagine, how do we prototype a strategy? How do we play with the concept? So the beauty of design has always been that, at the end of a design activity, I get a prototype and I can play with it and I can touch it and I can experiment. That's what's made those things quite powerful. And when we run normal design sprints that come into what's called a third order, second order problem, so you're creating services or products, you actually at the end of that sprint, you've got something physical that users can look at, and so they can engage with it better, and you get a much better feedback mechanism. But how do you do that at a fourth order level, all of this complexity? And so in areas and industries where there is a lot of that sort of abstract stuff, those industries that actually need this type of model. Manufacturing and a couple of the other hardcore areas, there's a pathway. And so we've got some clients who you start in the systems modeling space because it's abstract. But as you begin to solve some of these, you can convert those system dynamics models to actual physical ones. So it shows the shop floor and shows, the forklift moving along with this particular path to get there, and actually can create a physical environment that you can actually work with. And we don't use Stella for that. We use a tool called AnyLogic for that one. So there is a pathway to travel, but a lot of where we focus tends to be more in the complex space. So for those organizations that are struggling with unknowns and complexity, that's normally the space that we would go and start to build out these models.
I think, Craig, maybe it's also worth stating that, in certain sense that, and I know, the whole concept between a digital twin, a digital shadow, or a digital model is that, quite often we have a digital shadow or a model of an organization, but not necessarily a twin, which directly, in a lot of these cases over here, it's also about determining what the outcome of a strategic direction could be. And I'm not sure if that can also add on to the question that Semakaleng wanted to ask. It was not necessarily a digital twin of Stats SA, but it could also be that when Stats SA need to make strategic decisions and identify certain risks that they may have, that's where it could come into play. I'm not sure if you agree with my comments based on that. Then Semakaleng asked another question, which was, what is the value of digital twins in simulating non-profit KPIs, non-for-profit KPIs? Craig?
So with the stuff I can mimic any sort of behavior. So we call those sort of the intangible pieces. And so can I take something like knowledge and work out the impact of knowledge on an outcome? I can if I just give it a graphical figure. All right. So, can I take abstract concepts like my anger level, all right, and say the angrier someone gets, the more impact it's going to have on my sales. So I can build those abstract concepts in. So it doesn't have to be profitability KPIs. It can be abstract KPIs. And so all of those pieces we can actually model in. Some of them aren't as black and white as financial KPIs, but depending upon other pieces that you're trying to extract, all of that is modeled because it's all a stock or a flow of some type. We may not know the rules to increase the flow, but we know that it exists, all right? And so my anger level is a stock, and it goes up and it goes down. Well, what causes it to go up and what causes it to go down? And I can start to mimic some of those behaviors in there. And a lot of those sort of come in the sort of climate change pieces as well, and to just talk about what's the word? I forget the term we used for it, but basically the behavior of a village, their ability to accept change. And if that ability to accept the change was high, we could roll a policy and they would stop fishing in certain parts of the ocean, versus if their ability to change was low, it would take the policy longer to find its way into society, and therefore it would take longer for it to go out in their behavior, and therefore the fish reserves would be depleted in that particular area. So, we can often go right back to those things and create relationships and connections with them, and those are probably more abstract things. And perhaps what you might have been referring to is non-profit KPIs. So there are other sort of things that we can track. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Craig. Then we have a question from Tessa here. That could ongoing operational data ultimately be fed into the model to track the as-is system state against the desired system state?
Yes. So that's probably the closer to, sorry, digital shadow, where we're actually sort of bringing the data in from the physical object. And that's your first transition, by the way. If you want to do these types of things, that's kind of like where you want. And so you want to be able to pull operational data in, so you can actually see, well, what's actually happening in the organization, and how's it affecting the behavior of my system. And so now I can engage with it and actually sort of see, well, actual data is coming in, and I've got a reference mode, which is this is how we want it to behave, but with this actual data coming in, it's actually behaving in this way. So let's tweak these levers. Does it get the behavior up to where we want it to be? It does. All right. Or what were those levers we tweaked? Now we go to business and we implement those in the processes, the projects, to actually, it'll take another cycle for that to come around. And so maybe another month, we can start to see the month-end results and actually see, oh, okay, now let's take those month-end results, let's put them in the model. Did it actually make that change or not? Now you've got that data, remember. You've got the levers that you pulled, you've got the actions that you've executed, you've actually implemented it, and now you're getting the data back in again. So you close the loop, do that a few more times, and you've got some really robust data at a fairly high level, which you can use to train an algorithm to do some of that automatically. Thanks, Maurice.
Thanks very much, Craig. We've got a question from Judith here. Hi, Judith. Has this been done for any finance/asset management companies?
It has. Yeah.
One example is very much in line with that sort of.
Yeah, I think, that's a great space, because a lot of work we actually do is in the finance space, because it's so abstract, and there are, what's this financial instrument? Like, can I feel it? Can I touch it? No, you can't. So what's the impact on it? Well, what's the impact on reserves and liquidity on these financial instruments? And what happens if the interest rate goes up with these? And so those perfect environments to model this sort of behavior in, and we do quite a bit of that.
Okay, thanks very much. And I thought a nice question to wrap it all up. I think that was the last question. It's from Tim. Are you aware of any work being done to use AI to extract out the heuristic behavior model that exists in the system current state to accelerate the baseline dynamic systems model?
I'm not.
Yeah, asked a difficult question, eh?
You have to, Tim. You have to. Tim's the other director of our company, so I'm not quite sure. Use AI to extract out the heuristic. Yeah. It kind of makes sense, because you're kind of saying, can I actually look at a document or a business, and there's some rules there. So if we're creating a heuristic, can I then use that algorithm to almost reverse engineer a live business out and actually show me the structure? I think that's what you're asking, Tim. No, I'm not aware of that. It's a consistent conversation in the System Dynamics Society. How do we do the reverse of what we're trying to do? Is actually, we're spending all this time modeling and creating a very complex system dynamics model, but I just want to throw a document at it and say, read through this document and build a system dynamics model off the back of it, and then let me play with it. So we haven't yet got to that level. Thank you.
Yeah, that was his question. So thanks very much. I don't see any other questions. So if I just scan through, I didn't see any other questions. So yes, thank you very much, everyone. I really hope that you found this quite insightful. It's a total different way to start looking at the whole concept of strategy, using components from architecture to help build all these models and help you to understand it. And if you want to ask, how does that relate to enterprise architecture? One of the things that I can mention is that some of the models Craig has done is because he's done actually quite a bit of business architecture and to model the organization. So coming to Tim's question is, how did, using AI to extract it, it was actually using quite detailed and quite nice strategic business architecture models that helped Craig to come up with all the, the specific heuristics, behavior, and to come up with the model that he could start playing and actually creating the various baseline dynamic models that he used over there. So if you wanted to understand how architecture comes in there, architecture was used in a lot of ways, modeling the architecture to actually, at the end of the day, to create the models that he could play with in Stella and come up with the different questions. So thank you very much, Craig. I really do appreciate you taking the time and sharing your knowledge with us. And I really appreciate it and hope all of you found it very insightful. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Maurice. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone.